Well, good evening, everyone, and thank you for joining us today. We're delighted to have you here for a discussion with Boston 2024 about the Boston bid to host the Olympics here in our Commonwealth. We're very interested to have the opportunity to learn some more information and hear from individuals. I want to say thank you certainly to people who are here, and I have a note to myself, introduce yourself. I'm Pat Meservey, president here at Salem State University, for those of you who I don't know. I want to thank certainly the individuals that helped us organize this, and first and foremost is Lynn Montague from my own office, who was instrumental in making the connection for us with Boston 2024 and having them come to the North Shore, and also the North Shore Alliance for Economic Development, a group that is a mixture of business leader, nonprofit leaders, elected officials, policymakers who are bringing topics to the North Shore for us to have the important conversations, to learn more about what is happening that would help support economic development in our region. I do want to offer a very special welcome to Maureen McKinnon, gold medal Paralympic yachtswoman, that doesn't roll off my tongue, from Beijing 2008 Olympics and a Marblehead resident, so we're delighted to have local. And I'd also like to recognize Representative Paul Tucker, Salem State Representative, is here. I understand we have representatives from both Senator Lovely's office and from Representative Paracella. So Anna and Cam, thank you for joining us here today. Appreciate it. Would like to say hello to Rena Sustuk, who is here from the Salem Chamber and representing the business interests. Unfortunately, Congressman Moulton had wanted to join us here today, and he's not able to, but because he's on the other side of our campus giving a commencement speech to the North Shore Community College commencement. So he asked me to read some remarks from him, so I will do that. And he says, "I'm sorry that I could not be with you tonight. I'm here on campus, but giving the commencement address for North Shore Community College. I appreciate the city, university, and Boston 2024 for hosting this important forum on the prospect of bringing the Olympics to Massachusetts. It's critical that the public's voice be heard and that our perspective is incorporated into Boston 2024's bid. Hosting the Olympics provides an incredible opportunity to showcase before an international audience our state's heritage and deep culture. But more than that, I believe it creates a unique opportunity to develop a shared vision for the future of this region. This includes the much needed and long overdue discussion of critical infrastructure needs. Over the past several months, we've experienced just how dire our transportation situation has become. But canceled trains, potholes, traffic jams, and crumbling bridges are only the symptoms of a much bigger problem. If we want Boston to be a world-class city and for our district to be part of a world-class region, we must double down on truly transformational rail and transit investments. The Olympics brings the urgency, which is currently lacking, to this important conversation. I also know that there are very real concerns about funding. I believe that any plan must include a framework that leverages private investments to support the Olympic event, and that any public expenditures go towards making investments in improving the quality of life for Massachusetts citizens for decades to come. I look forward to continuing to participate in the public dialogue in these conversations in the coming months, and I look forward to working with the community and Boston 2024 to come to the best conclusion for our district and for the Commonwealth." So we thank Congressman Moulton for those remarks. Unfortunately, Mayor Driscoll also was not able to be with us this evening, but I know she shares a very strong interest in the Boston 2024 bid. And Lynn Duncan, our city planner, is here, I'm sure, gathering information that will be provided back to the mayor. So our purpose of hosting this event here this evening is to inform our understanding of the Boston 2024 bid, to learn more about the plans that have been underway to host the games in Boston, to learn about what are the opportunities for the North Shore to participate should the bid be successful. How do we engage in that, and hopefully have some of the events here in our region, and certainly be able to benefit from some of the infrastructure changes that would need to occur. And as we move into the Q&A, the opportunity to hear the views and impressions of our neighbors that have gathered in the room here today. So to achieve this, we have several people who will be presenting to us. And before I turn the, I will go right forward and turn the mic over to Nico Mendoza. She is the Vice President for Engagement Strategy and External Affairs of Boston 2024. And Nico will lead us through this conversation. Thank you.
Thank you very much, President Meservey. Thank you so much for hosting us here in this beautiful library, very aptly named after our former Senator, Senator Berry. I had the extreme fortune and pleasure to work with Senator Berry in my previous life when I worked in state government, and I know just how lucky you all were here under his leadership. So it's great to be here with all of you, and thank you again for hosting us. As President Meservey mentioned, my name is Nico Mendoza from Boston 2024. We truly appreciate the opportunity to be here in lovely Salem on a beautiful night, to be with all of you for this very important conversation. Representative, thank you so much for being here. It's good to see you, and we look forward to working with you. We certainly appreciate Congressman Moulton's comments as well. We had the opportunity to meet with the Congressman and the rest of our congressional delegation in DC a couple of months ago, and we look forward to continuing that conversation as well. Thank you again so much for being here. I'd also like to welcome our audience watching this on live stream, thanks in part to a partnership we have with WCVB Channel 5. It's nice to see you all tonight. A lot of new faces, actually. We've had several community meetings. We've launched a series of 20 community meetings over 20 weeks across the Commonwealth, in addition to the series of 9 that Mayor Walsh is hosting in the city of Boston. But whether this is your first meeting or your 5th, we appreciate you taking the time out of your schedules to join us for this important conversation. We are very much interested in hearing your input and your ideas, your questions and concerns as we continue to develop our bid over the next few months in partnership with all of you. Our bid will be stronger because of all of your input, and we look forward to hearing from you. We've structured the agenda with a brief presentation, as the President mentioned, with some updates, actually late-breaking updates within the past couple of hours that we'll share with all of you. And we'll be sure to leave plenty of time for questions and discussion at the end of our presentation. We want this meeting to be as productive as possible, so you get a lot out of it, and so do we. We've shared with you when you checked in, you should have received a list of our 10 principles at Boston 2024. In addition to all the questions and comments that you may have, we're very interested in hearing your thoughts about these principles, perhaps which of the 10 are most important to you, and any ideas or suggestions you may have about how we might achieve them in partnership with all of you. These 10 principles we'll talk about a little bit later in our discussion. So, with that housekeeping completed, we will get started. First, I'd like to introduce my colleague who will also offer a presentation, this evening. Kent Knight is Vice President at Elkus Manfredi Architects, which is a very important partner in our planning and analysis efforts. Kent is a distinguished designer of innovative and collaborative spaces for world-renowned institutions, including the New York Genome Center, Cornell University, and Dartmouth College. He'll speak shortly about our planning concepts and legacy opportunities. But first, it's my pleasure to introduce, and President Meservey mentioned her before, our very special guest who personifies the true power of sport. Maureen McKinnon, as the President mentioned, is a Paralympic yachtswoman and Marblehead resident. And in addition to winning gold in Beijing in 2008, she was also the first woman to represent the United States in sailing at the Paralympic Games. So thank you, Maureen, for blazing that trail for us. She's also on the board of directors of U.S. Sailing and is actually currently training to compete in Rio next year. So we're really lucky to have her. We're lucky that she took some time out of her training schedule to be with us. And I'd like to turn it over to Maureen to talk a little bit about her experiences competing. Maureen.
Thank you, Nico. My name, again, is Maureen McKinnon. I live pretty much just down the street from here. I'm a North Shore girl, and I've grown up in this area almost my entire life. I'm from Massachusetts, and I'm very proud of this bid, and I'm very proud of all of the elements of it, and also all the strategies that have been addressed and all the concerns that have been addressed in it. Sailing has been a huge part of my life over the past decade or so. I'm on my 4th campaign right now, going to Rio. I have had the pleasure of being in 2 different Olympic venues already. One was Athens, and it was an interesting venue and continues to exist. I've also been in Beijing, and I've had the honor of having my name engraved in the wall as a gold medalist in the large bird's nest stadium that they speak of. I've seen the power of sport, and I've seen how empowering my particular sport has been for people with all different types of disabilities. In my particular sport of sailing, we have folks that have visual impairments. We have folks who are paralyzed like myself, many who are far more paralyzed than me. We also have folks that have lost limbs. Some have been engaged in, they're veterans who have lost limbs, and they are participating throughout the world in our sport. And I'm very proud of Boston. I went to school in Boston. I may not have a Boston accent, but I owned a business in Boston. I owned a flower shop for 10 years. And I have sailed in the waters from the top of our state down to the Buzzards Bay. And we have nice, clean water here, and it's for a venue to be able to offer that on a worldwide level. We're kind of spoiled here in the United States, and we have very clean water compared to some of the other venues that we've had to go to. I really fully support this campaign, and I really think that Boston is the best choice for Olympics in 2024.
Thank you very much, Maureen. Yes, thank you. Let's give her a round of applause. Absolutely. Maureen's being humble as always, but she's been truly a leader as one of the members of our Olympic and Paralympic Movement Committee, and really helping us galvanize and activate our local Olympians and Paralympians to get behind this effort and really tell their stories just like Maureen did. And they're all inspirations, and I will say selfishly that is, I think, the most interesting, fascinating, and personally rewarding experience of this opportunity is to really work with folks like Maureen to hear about their stories and really tell their stories on a larger scale. So, moving on, why we're here and what we're going to be talking about over the next hour or two with you, and then where we go from here. As I mentioned earlier, that we are engaged in a very robust public conversation with our communities all across Massachusetts, and we're very grateful that when we first launched our 20 and 20 listening to our community meeting concept, Mayor Driscoll was one of the first to raise her hand, as always, as she always does, and say we would love to host you in Salem and offer an opportunity to hear more about this effort. So we absolutely appreciate her continued leadership and advocacy, both on behalf of her own city and the region, but really as a partner in getting this message across the Commonwealth. We believe that this is truly our moment here in Boston, in the region, and in Massachusetts to pursue a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to think about our future, as the President alluded to. What does this mean for the region? What does this mean for our Commonwealth? How do we use this opportunity to talk about not just those month and a half or so in 2024, but really beyond that in 2030 and 2040, thinking about the long-term vision and planning for this city, the city of Boston, for the region, for the Commonwealth, and how the games and planning for it and conversations about it can align with those visions and perhaps serve as a catalyst to get some of those creative ideas and opportunities moving. We believe very strongly that Boston and Massachusetts will be good for the Olympic Games and the Olympic movement. We have very world-renowned colleges and universities. We're here at one right now. Innovative research centers, unparalleled love and passion for sport. And we know all of that combined, we can really use that creativity, that brain power, to deliver the most sustainable, innovative, creative games in Olympic history. Kent will talk a little bit about some of the planning concepts around that. That is really why, folks, the U.S. Olympic Committee chose us among the 4 cities. You all know that during the first phase, we were in competition against LA, San Francisco, DC, during the U.S. phase. But really, it's that innovative approach that why the USOC chose us. Our plans for the 2024 Games also align with the International Olympic Committee's Agenda 2020. This is their reform agenda for a more manageable, cost-efficient Games, and really, Boston can serve as a model for a sustainable Games model for the future. As we've been talking about before, we also believe that the Games can be good for Boston and the region. A couple of months ago, the Boston Foundation commissioned the UMass Donahue Institute to conduct an independent financial analysis of the potential economic benefit of hosting the 2024 Games. And this is what this slide speaks to here, is the opportunity to host the Games will lead to benefits in infrastructure improvements like we've talked about, but also billions of dollars in economic activity in the form of jobs, increased tourism, an approximate $5 billion in economic impact during the Games alone. So we know that this is a unique opportunity to generate economic opportunity, increased tourism. We'll talk about it later on, but in the year leading after the London 2012 Games in 2013, London surpassed Paris as the most visited city in the world, a title that Paris had held for decades, at least, that we know of. So there's an opportunity here, really, to see and feel an economic impact that we know will extend well beyond Boston, well across the Commonwealth. To be very clear, the last 3 Olympic Games in the United States have been profitable. You'll see here some of the numbers from LA in '84, Atlanta in 1996, and Salt Lake City in 2002, the profits of which all were returned back into the community for education programs, community benefits, and youth sport opportunities. The social legacy is another piece that we want to highlight and reinforce here. Again, the opportunity to build on existing social impact infrastructure in these 3 cities, bolster civic pride. We know that when we rally around a single cause, something like hosting the Games back in the United States, which is actually an important point I want to reinforce here. Yes, we are Boston's bid. Yes, we are Massachusetts' bid, but we are, most importantly, the bid of the United States of America. We will be the only American city competing. We are the only American city competing on the international stage, and this is a very extraordinary opportunity to bring the Games back home to the U.S. If in 2024, it will have been 28 years since the '96 Atlanta Games, so 28 years since the U.S. has hosted the Summer Games, and we know that we can certainly bring it back home to the U.S. in the world's best sports city. The LA 84 Foundation is probably the best example of a unique opportunity to use the profits of hosting the Games and the economic benefit of hosting the Games to further continue youth sport legacy. So the LA 84 Foundation was created with the was created by an endowment from the profits from the LA 84 Games, and to this day they continue to serve youth sport programs across Southern California. And you can see here 3 million youth served, over 5,000 coaches trained every year. We've had the opportunity to visit with Anita DeFrance, who is a member of the International Olympic Committee and is the president of the LA 84 Foundation. And she's also a member of the USOC board and speaks very passionately and eloquently about the opportunities through this foundation to serve the youth of Southern California. Now I'm going to turn it over to Kent to talk a little bit about our planning concepts. Kent.
Thank you, Nico. It's great to be here. It's a beautiful evening, and the facility we're in is really quite spectacular. Maureen talked about the power of sport. We come at this from the planning side, and I want to talk about the power of planning because we feel that's very important in our effort. What you see on the screen are 4 fundamental planning concepts that have informed our work since we began this bid effort over a year ago. We want the Games to be not only environmentally sustainable, but also fiscal and socially sustainable. We know the Olympics move every 2 years. Given that fact, we still want to make the games and the plan sustainable. We want the games to be the most walkable and accessible in modern times. 28 of the 33 venues in the current plan are within a 10-kilometer radius. Tokyo, who's hosting the 2020 games, has 26 venues in that 10-kilometer radius. And if you go back to 1980 and look at all the summer games, that number of venues within that radius rapidly decreases. So we want to take advantage of transit as well as the fact that by having the venues close, you can actually walk to them. The planning is not only about the games themselves and those 16 days of the Olympics followed by 10 days of the Paralympics, but it's just as much about the legacy value that the games and all this planning will leave behind for Boston and the region. I'll give you 2 quick examples. The Olympic Village is planned at UMass Boston. We have to accommodate 16,500 athletes. Part of the current thinking is that 4,000 of those beds could remain after the games as university housing dormitories for UMass Boston. Another example of the physical legacy is the stadium itself. It's planned right now to be at Whitehead Circle. That's a area of Boston that's kind of caught between South Boston and the South End, right along 93. We'll need to create a platform of about 83 acres that will support the stadium itself as well as all the surrounding events. There's practice fields that are close by. There's all of the marshaling areas for the fans to get through security and get into the stadium. There's all of the setup for the media. After the games, the stadium is disassembled, moved elsewhere, and re-erected. It's actually recycled. But the platform itself becomes a deck for a new, what we're calling Midtown mixed-use neighborhood, what the Mayor Walsh likes to call the transit village. So that's just 2 examples of the legacy that will live far into the future as a result of the games. And lastly, we're in a world-class institution here this evening. We want to take advantage of the facilities that Harvard, BU, and MIT can offer in terms of their athletic facilities. Use those for the games as opposed to building new facilities that we can take advantage of what's existing. So further on the legacy opportunities, there's 6 bullets listed here. Social resiliency. The mayor announced a couple weeks ago Boston's 2030 plan. This is the first time in 50 years that the city of Boston is undertaking a comprehensive urban design plan that will look at all areas of the city. This would have happened regardless of the Olympic bid, but we like to feel that the bid has spurned this effort. As we start talking about planning and ideas like Whitehead Circle, the mayor and the BRA are going to be looking at these same areas from their perspective. There'll be great reinvestment in the public realm. Think of the emerald necklace that exists today because of Olmsted's planning. Imagine it being extended from South Station down along Fort Point Channel to the stadium site. That would connect to Broadway on the Red Line, connect down Dot Ave to Andrews on the Red Line, connect to the Olympic Village at UMass Boston on the harbor, and connect all the way to Columbia Point. And that would remain as a pedestrian bicycle realm for the public use, true public realm. We know after this winter that the infrastructure needs improvement. The 2024 will not fix all of that, but it will certainly help the conversation to improve and promote public transportation. I talked about the recyclable stadium as a new technology, new project delivery methods. For the UMass Boston, we're looking at modular housing. It could be built off-site in a factory, brought in quickly, erected, and then potentially reused after the games. There would be another 11,000 beds. That equals about 5,000 units of housing, or 3 to 5,000 units of housing that could be moved into the neighborhoods for mixed use and affordable housing. In Boston, there's been a lot of discussion in the last 5 years of sea level change and sea level rise. And the thinking is to plan for resiliency, not wait for a Sandy to hit Boston, but start preparing now. And to the degree that the Olympic planning can again participate in that conversation, we are doing that. And lastly, if you've been to Boston lately, which I'm sure you have, you've seen all the tower cranes and the tremendous boom in construction. That's all part of the innovation economy, which we hope will continue. A big key to that is transportation and connectivity. So this ties back into the commuter rail, to the MBTA, to our road and bridge network, and improving all of that to bolster the innovation economy. I want to talk just for a minute about, give you a very broad overview of the planning of the games. The proposal that was submitted organizes the games into 2 clusters, a waterfront cluster on the Boston harbor front and what we call the university cluster. The 2 major elements at the waterfront cluster are the stadium that I've mentioned and the Olympic Village. We think the stadium site just down Dot Ave from South Station is the perfect site, given the transit connection to South Station, given its link to the Red Line, and that it will connect the stadium to the waterfront, the Greenway, and the harbor. Along Fort Point Channel, where the post office is now, and that section of Dot Ave is closed. By 2024, the post office will have relocated. Dot Ave will be reopened as the Olympic Boulevard. That'll be a pedestrian link. Fort Point Channel itself, you see in some of the renderings, will have barges along it to activate the channel. And that will really, between South Station and the stadium, over the course of the Olympics and the Paralympics, that will become a spine of activity and energy. The Olympic Village itself is planned as a complete village, and by that I mean it's planned for the complete athletes' experience. Not only is it the dorm spaces for them during the games, it's the dining hall where they take their meals, it's a transit hub where they board the buses to and from their venues, and there's also the International Plaza, which will look out over the water, the harbor, and the skyline. And that's a place where the athletes and their families can meet after the events, gather, socialize, buy souvenirs, etc. I'm sorry, I jumped ahead. The university cluster, the main legacy here, or the main plan, is to take advantage of the confluence of BU, MIT, and Harvard on the Charles River and provide a pedestrian link from BU, from Commonwealth Avenue, across what is now the Beacon Yards rail yards to Harvard's Future Innovation Campus and to their athletic fields. So this becomes a pedestrian link during the games, but remains as a connection between those universities after the games. Lastly, I just want to mention potential venues outside of Boston that are being looked at. In Lowell, the Tsongas Center for boxing, Gillette Stadium in Foxborough for what the Olympics calls football, or what we call soccer, the Olympics calls football, rugby, golf at the Country Club in Brookline, and looking at Buzzards Bay, New Bedford for sailing as an alternate venue to Boston Harbor, and the Merrimack River for rowing and canoeing. Grab my stuff.
Thank you. Thanks, Kent. And we do have some renderings of some ideas and concepts of the facilities that Kent just mentioned. If you haven't had an opportunity to take a quick look outside, feel free to take a look, and you can peruse later on as well. And I will add that, as Kent mentioned, this was the proposal, the concept that we submitted to the U.S. Olympic Committee back in December, and upon which their decision to move forward with Boston was based. Since then, we've continued to listen and learn from our communities to fine-tune and refine our plans, which we'll continue to do so over the next few months. But we do anticipate coming back out to the communities with a more refined 2.0 version, if you will, of our venues concept and games concept by June 30th. So stay tuned for more updates on that front. Now, this is the fun part, I think. We want Salem and the North Shore region to be involved in this very exciting opportunity, and here's how. Starting now, really. We are thinking about and brainstorming opportunities for youth programs and connecting our athletes to our youth and communities across the Commonwealth. So working with folks like Maureen and her Olympic and Paralympic colleagues on sport clinics and sport camps, other opportunities to engage with youth. One of our volunteers, who I'm sure you saw earlier, Graham, earlier today, was at a youth sport event in Lexington and talking about the Olympics and what the opportunities and legacies could be for promoting and sustaining youth sports across the Commonwealth. As you will recall, the fundamental point and the fundamental theory behind the Olympics really is to promote the power of sport as the convener of peace and people and communities. So how do we bring that home here to our kids in Boston and Salem and Massachusetts and beyond? Just as another example, two new members of our board, Meb Kevlisi, who, as we all know, won the Boston Marathon in 2014, unfortunately missed it this year, but is still an elite athlete. He recently joined our board, as well as Michelle Kwan, a two-time Olympian and medalist. Just recently, Meb was out at Boys and Girls Clubs in Boston, and Meb and Michelle visited YMCAs in and around the city. So again, how do we connect our athletes to our youth? Another exciting opportunity coming up that we'd love all of your feedback on, we mentioned to Mayor Driscoll recently, is celebrating Olympic Day with us. Olympic Day officially is June 23rd. It's an internationally recognized by the IOC and celebrated by the USOC as, again, another opportunity to celebrate the values of Olympism. Fair play, excellence, peace, again, the power of sport. We would love to partner with your sport communities here, whether they're youth, amateur, adult, of all ages, to really partner with us and partner with the Olympic Day opportunities, and to think about how we work together on that opportunity. So really, these opportunities start now. Another way for us to work with you, and we're very excited to talk to your business leaders here about our localization ideas and efforts. We're working to develop a plan to ensure that the economic benefits that we talked about earlier extend to the people and businesses across Massachusetts in three key areas. One is our local business initiative, working with focusing on women, minority, and veterans-owned businesses. To supply goods and services as we lead up to and certainly during the games. Another opportunity is through workforce development, partnering with community, government, labor leaders to think about how we can better prepare our people to make sure we create pathways to those jobs and careers, again, that we mentioned, that we know are going to be there and that we mentioned earlier. Finally, we are working to establish an empowerment and opportunity working group focusing on access to better paying jobs, MBE businesses, as I mentioned earlier, and affordable housing. And thinking with all of you and partners in these key areas on how we make sure, again, that these benefits and these opportunities extend to all people across Massachusetts. Other regional opportunities here that we want to work with you on are potentially the Cultural Olympiad, which is a new and exciting thing that we're continuing to learn about. It is a requirement of the International Olympic Committee of its host city to highlight cultural events leading up to the Games. And we know we have a whole treasure trove of cultural, arts, music, theater assets right here in Salem, right across the North Shore for sure. So how can we think about highlighting these assets from the Berkshires to Provincetown to the North Shore and everywhere in between? London was a great example of their Cultural Olympiad. Over 175,000 activities, 38 million engagements that were free to the public. So anything from dance and theater, Shakespeare readings, of course, when you're in London, but poetry slams and music festivals. We were contacted 2 days ago by a group called the New England Watercolor Society, and they said they're very excited about starting to establish a watercolor exhibit to happen during the game. So it's ideas and creative suggestions just like that we want to hear from you. Tourism we talked about earlier, but test events leading up to the Games. In order to make sure that we can successfully host these games and we can make sure that these competitions run smoothly, we have to have test events. So that'll happen in the years leading up to the Games. The torch relay for sure. When we are announced as the host city, we want that Olympic torch to travel through every single one of the 351 cities and towns across this Commonwealth. Volunteer opportunities, starting now for sure. We've recruited and activated over 2,500 volunteers to date, still looking for more to help us share information about our bid and get people excited about this opportunity. And then closer to the Games, training camps for National Olympic Committees and teams that come to the host city 6-8 weeks in advance of the Games to train, to acclimate, to get used to their surroundings. And as I understand it, Maureen can correct me if I'm wrong, but in the case of sailing, those athletes come to the host city several years in advance as well. So really exciting opportunities for local, regional tourism and hospitality. We'll need to look for places to house them, to feed them, to train them, and we'll love to partner with all of you on that. I mentioned some relatively late-breaking news. The last several weeks, we've announced some new members to our board. I think you'll recognize some familiar faces here. But again, as we continue and move forward with our bidding process, we wanted to make sure that we had the right people in place to help us win, because if I haven't mentioned it already, we are absolutely in it to win it here. So we need folks with the expertise in sports, in business, in finance, in civic leadership, community leadership as well. And just this afternoon, you may have heard or read that Steve Paliuka, managing director at Bain and a co-owner of the Boston Celtics, has now taken on a role as chairman of our bid, and we're very excited to have him officially take on this role. He's been a key and integral part of our team from the very beginning, but now taking on this new leadership role as our chairman, we're very excited about it as we think about, again, moving forward with our bid process. We're really looking for and focusing on sport management, the athlete and spectator experience, as well as I mentioned earlier, honing in on our games concept, including our venue planning and our financial analysis. So I think with Steve's background, both in sport and also financing, we have a really great leadership team in place to continue this process. Speaking of process, it's hard to believe that we're just over 100 days in since we were officially announced as the U.S. partner city. Feels like several years, but it's all been fun. But just a quick note on where we go from here. As I mentioned, we'll be back out to our communities by the end of June, by June 30th, with a more refined version of our games concept. In September of this year, we will partner with the USOC to officially declare our intent as a candidate city. Our first submission to the International Olympic Committee is due in January of 2016, and as I'm sure you've all heard and read, we are very much supporting a statewide referendum on the ballot in November of 2016. The final decision by the United States Olympic Committee will be made in Lima, Peru in the summer of 2017. So we still have a very long way to go till that final decision, and then certainly much more work and much more analysis ahead of us when we are named as the host city in Lima. we would love for you all to get involved again tonight. First and of many opportunities to hear from you, your ideas, your suggestions. If you are interested in getting more involved with us as a volunteer, we would love to have your energies and talents on that effort as well. That wraps up our official presentation. I just wanted to show a very brief video before we turn it over to questions and discussion right now. This is Anita DeFrance, I mentioned earlier. She's an International Olympic Committee member and a member of the United States Olympic Committee Board. And just a quick word from Anita about her impressions about hosting games in a particular city. I think it should go. Whoops. I will try it on the computer. Excuse me 1 second. Thank you. Thanks, Nate.
My name is Anita L. DeFrance. I was able to make the 1976 Olympic team, and we rowed in Montreal. Boston has an extraordinarily rich tradition of rowing. In fact, one of the two schools that started the intercollegiate sport is Harvard in 1852. I had a chance to row at several heads of the Charles. It's this pageant of rowers, just boat after boat after boat for 2 days, and it's just magnificent. The people of Boston are very generous people, and that's what you need in a community that's going to host the games. It's essential because you're going to be hosting these athletes who are the special test with history. The games themselves are a celebration of human excellence. There's just nothing like it. And to be the community that's hosting the Olympic Village is such a privilege. The benefit to the people of any host city is that your lives are changed. The world will be looking at you. You will have stories to tell forever. I want to bring the games back to the United States. Boston is our representative. They're our Olympic team, and I want to make sure our Olympic team wins.
We'll turn it over to your questions and comments. We have a microphone over here, so please feel free to line up. We do want to hear from as many of you as we possibly can tonight, so we just ask that you be concise in your questions or comments. Be courteous. I'm sure there are plenty of various opinions and ideas here. We respect them all. And be constructive, too. As I mentioned, in addition to your feedback, we also are interested to hear about your thoughts on the principles, your thoughts on our concepts, thoughts about other things that are happening. So start here. Sir, thank you.
Thank you for coming.
Thank you for having us.
My name is Dr. Stuart McMahon. I'm the Programme Coordinator for Sport Management at Salem State University. And you'll hear some academicians that are naysayers. I happen to be a yay-sayer. Having been a kid that grew up in the projects, that went on to become a world-class gymnast, and then produce gymnasts to go on the US team, World Championship teams for the US, and having lived in Commonwealth Games villages, I understand the benefit of sport. Sport can bring you a long way in life, and we've got a golden opportunity here in Massachusetts and in Boston. One of the things I really liked was number 7, because I am an academician. Education and youth sports opportunities are created for the young people of Massachusetts. I've actually brought my legal issues class here tonight so that they can learn policy and action.
So there's a quiz on this tomorrow, is that right?
Possibly. So I was a world-class gymnast. I was team captain and national champion of Scotland. And my colleague, Dr. Peter Smolyanov, was formerly on the Soviet pentathlon team. Then went to Australia, where they hired him to help coach the pentathletes for the Sydney Games. As a former world-class athlete and sport management academician, I would strongly encourage the committee to take advantage of sport management academicians who have spent our whole life studying this. We've got some great people at UMass Amherst. There's myself and my colleague, Dr. Smolyanov, here at Salem State, and there's many others. And we have a whole lot of future sport managers. So when we talk about creating a legacy, I would ask you to think about these future sport management students to get involved in the process. One of the other things I wanted to mention was creating a legacy is important, Having seen the London Olympics, watched the US compete against France in women's soccer, and then having just recently, last year, been at the Glasgow Commonwealth Games, I know that legacy is important. And I have talked to Senator Joan Lovely, and one of the things about Massachusetts is they have a huge lottery system. And one of the ways that you could catapult the youth of Massachusetts is to look at that potential through lottery systems to help those families that can't afford to pay to play for after-school programs at school. And think about the youth in Massachusetts and try and provide a legacy for them to keep them off the streets, to keep them in after-school programs. There's a way that we can do that. So
We certainly agree with you, and thank you.
Yep.
And we'll take you up on that offer to use your expertise and that of your colleagues. Certainly, we have a lot more to learn about sports management, and we can definitely use your ideas and brainpower on that. Thank you, Dr. McMahon. Hello.
Hi, Robert Goss Kennedy. I'm a Salem resident. So first I want to kind of lay down where a lot of people in Salem are coming from right now in general. Lately there's a feeling that we haven't been listened to and we're unrepresented in our local government. There have actually been some issues with this institution purchasing land, displacing people, and eroding our tax base. And because of the way state law works, we don't have any input into that. We are locked out. So stuff happens, and we bear the burden. Now, as to number 8, which you kind of blew past really fast in that presentation, because I think 8 is incredibly important, incredibly important. We're very wary of this effort because of what our history is, okay? We see a lot of money coming in and a lot of power. And this is nice and all, but we also know you can just go home and tell us to go screw ourselves, okay? We know that. I mean, you know, you don't have to listen to us. I appreciate it, but I don't know what you're going to do after this. You know, we're concerned about things like eminent domain being used to seize property in Boston. That property would be removed from the tax revenue stream because, while I appreciate, and everybody I think appreciates the charitable aspect of this, at the same time, if you end up taking land that was formerly zoned commercial residential and was paying taxes, and that land is then given to a nonprofit, that's no more taxes, and that's a big issue right now because we do have the eroding infrastructure which we have to pay for no matter what, right? Mm-hmm. So Boston's a dense city. That land generates, a small bit of land can generate a lot of taxes, so that's a big issue. And then there's the fact that the IOC mandates, this is the IOC, not you guys, so I'm putting the blame with them. I want to make that clear. I don't think that's anything you've come up with. They mandate that the host city pays for any cost overruns and has to deal with basically has to do whatever it has to do to get the games paid for and on time, which I understand why they have that. There's been vague talk about insurance, and honestly, when I see something that says sophisticated, considering recent events in the last few years on Wall Street, it seems to me that might mean complicated, and I don't like complicated financial things as a person. So I'm going to ask you tonight, and I think this is an important question to answer. What protections will you give the people against eminent domain seizures of property, tax-based depletion, and would the very wealthy backers of the bid be willing to put up $5 billion of their own property up as collateral against any cost overruns? The idea being that if you did that and you had overrun, then the people who've been pushing this, and there has been a lot of billionaires, you got Romney in there, we know that, you got Fish, that they would then, we'd have collateral, like a mortgage on your house. If I want to build an addition on my house and I can't afford it, I can't go to the city if I have a cost overrun. And if I can't pay my bill, I lose the bank gets my house. Mm-hmm. So why aren't we exploring that? Forget insurance. Just, say, here's the guys who want this, they can easily pull together $5 billion in collateral. And if everything goes well, there's be no issue, will there? they'll get their stuff back. So why aren't we talking about that?
All great questions, Robert. Thank you. Just on the eminent domain part, just to be very perfectly clear, we will not be using eminent domain to assemble land for any of the proposed venues.
Will anybody you work with do that?
No.
Okay, so you
No.
won't have somebody else. 'Cause
Eminent
that's what
domain
the
is
situation we
completely-
kind of have here. We have a
Eminent
secret
domain is off the
corporation that
table.
buys land and then
No.
hands it to these guys.
No.
So
Eminent domain is not going. Is off the table as far as any of the.
That's
the
very
proposed
admirable.
venues.
Thank you for that.
As far as the collateral idea that you mentioned, we have not explored that idea that you mentioned. We are, however, very seriously looking at, as you mentioned, very sophisticated, perhaps complex insurance packages to serve as the guarantees for those cost overruns. Chicago, in its bid for the 2016 games, put together a very interesting model that we're taking a look at. But we have not currently looked into the idea that you suggested. And then as far as taxpayer funding, no taxpayer dollars will be used to construct venues or for the overall operation of the games. There is a security component that we do need to partner with the federal government to think about security costs. It's a very serious question, and it's a very serious challenge that we need to think about. The price tag is still something that we have not been able to completely determine at this point in the game. But on the security side, if we are not able to get the federal funding from the federal government to cover the cost of security, then we cannot host the games here in Boston, and quite frankly, in the United States, period. We're just not able to, as a
I'm sure your sponsors have a few congressmen they own and senators. Okay, I'm sure that won't be the issue. Like I said, our big issue is that when you say stuff like that, I worry about the nebulous parts of it, like, oh well, technically this isn't part of the games, and then we end up paying for it. And maybe it's not even you guys who say that. Maybe it's somebody else at the IOC. We are dealing with multi-levels here. Honestly, I see a country that's been severely wounded by the wealthy taking advantage of us, and now they're asking for some favors. And I don't think there's anything wrong with them putting it all out on the table too. If we're gonna have to deal with the traffic, all that stuff that's gonna come with this, and the risks, they have to put some risk out there. And I don't think insurance is not the answer, because you know what? How many people have had an insurance claim and it turns out you didn't get what you thought you would?
Thank you for your comments. That's an interesting idea. Thank you. Sir, with your next question.
Forgive me, 1 second. My name is Ben Morgan. I'm a student here at Salem State University in the School of Social Work. I thank you very much for being here and for holding these meetings. It's very much appreciated. I was born the year of the Lake Placid Olympics, and I grew up in upstate New York, sort of in the shadow of that. Nobody speaks the name of that city without mentioning the 1980 Olympics. I am way on the fence. I more recently lived in what is the university development zone for the plan. But here, as a future social worker, somebody who does work in the field right now, I just want to say that I really am gratified that things like affordable housing are part of the plan for the legacy of the Olympics. However, I came to give you a little bit of a proposal for something that can be part of your pitch and have similar effects. So, forgive me, I'm going to reference my notes here. I want you to be able to put a sheen on your bid to the IOC, you and the USOC. We want to leverage one of the primary selling points that the partnership has used to rally support within the state. Sorry, the Commonwealth. I'm an old New Yorker. The idea that 24,000 talented, skilled workers will be put to work in the construction phase of this project and then presumably continue to work building a legacy after the games. So, with that in mind, in his inaugural speech, Governor Baker cited the 1,500 families who are living homeless in hotels across the Commonwealth. I propose that Boston 2024 allocate a portion of its marketing budget to putting Boston's skilled labor to work prior to the games in order to provide permanent and affordable housing to those families. The reason I say marketing budget is because I think that this is something that can then come to the IOC when we say that those families are housed before ground is ever broken on an Olympic facility in the city of Boston. If we can do this, then we can go to the IOC and we can say our city has accomplished something that no other Olympic bidder is able to do. If you're interested in this idea, you can find me at the university. But know that I will have my degree before the games are held, and I will help hold you to the legacy that you've suggested will be the case. So
We hope you do. It's a very interesting idea, and in fact, we actually had a meeting. Yes, absolutely. Sorry. London is an interesting model. We had just heard that as part of their legacy development company that is currently looking at the future use of the physical plan, future use of buildings. Part of that also considered what are the social opportunities here, and one of their programs was a sort of an apprenticeship, an opportunity to work on, and not just on the construction jobs. That certainly was a focus, but how did they look to employ folks in East London that were most impacted by what was happening with the game? So we had just heard about it actually earlier today and have some ideas around how we might be able to learn more about that. So thank you very much for your idea, and we do certainly hope that you
Thank
hold
you.
us to all that.
Just as a follow-up, I want to be very clear that I want this being part of the bid. So I think
Theirs
the
was as
idea
well.
of legacy is a fantastic
Right.
idea, but
Right.
I think that this needs to be done and needs to be put into action before the bid actually is complete.
We agree with you. Legacy doesn't start in 2024 when the games are done. Completely agree with you. Thank you for that. Sir, hello.
Good evening. Sorry. My name is PJ Curran, and I am a Greater Boston tour guide. So my comment and some of my concerns are frankly of a more practical nature. We spend, professional tour guides, of course, we spend hundreds of days a year either walking or accompanying groups of visitors around the city and the Greater Boston area. As I said, either on foot or on a coach, providing narrative to the group. And probably the most complex part of our role is getting from Copley Square to the top of Beacon Hill. I'm sure you know that there are only a few limited routes. And of course, everybody wants to take Boylston Street, Charles Street, Beacon Street. And therefore, I am very opposed to any use of Boston Common as a venue site. I joined the Friends of the Public Garden, who have jurisdiction for public art in the Boston Common, and I know that they made their sentiments and wishes clear to the committee. I feel that not only is it a treasured space, but the general area is far too complex at present to accommodate anything unusual like a venue constructed inside the Boston Common, which of course is 54 acres of sacred space in a city. It's a miracle that we have it to begin with. And I truly do feel that it would forever impair the value of the common if such an activity was to take place there. And the impact, of course, would just be beyond belief, because on a typical day, it's so difficult to navigate through Boston. Coaches, as you know, can't use Star Road Drive, so we have to use the street. And thankfully, we are a city that is a very attractive city to travelers and visitors, and we're very happy with that, and we love it. And otherwise, as a group, we haven't, I'm also on the board of the Greater Boston Tour Guide Association, but these comments are my comments, not on behalf of the board. But we do plan to have a conversation as a group and poll our members. But I will offer simply that individually we all do share concerns about the traffic impact of an activity right in the center of the Boston Common area.
Great. And for folks who may not know what Mr. Curran is referring to, we had originally proposed beach volleyball on Boston Common. We did think it was a creative idea. Certainly have heard very similar concerns from, and had very productive conversations with the Friends of the Public Garden and other immediate stakeholders. Kent, do you want to talk a little bit about the thinking behind that and some other ideas?
Well, is this on? Can you hear me? There we go. Nico's right. The original bid had beach volleyball on the portion of the Boston Common where the parking garage is. So it was over the structured subsurface garage, as well as potentially the start of the marathon and the start of the bicycle marathon. We've been getting a lot of feedback from all these community meetings, and that concern has been raised. And we're in the process right now of looking at options for just about all of the venues. And a big piece of that is not only the site itself and does it accommodate the event, but in the case of beach volleyball, I think it's about a 6,000 seat stadium that comes with it. So it's not a small footprint. And then there's back of house, as Maureen will tell you, there's back of house facilities for the coaches, the trainers, the athletes, all the security piece. But also we have to look at transportation and how the athletes and coaches get to these venues as well as the spectators. So those are all considerations, and we're weighing each venue we look at against that criteria. Part of the games is hosting. Boston will be the host to the world, and we'll be inviting the world to our doorstep. In London, beach volleyball was in the Queen's backyard, very sacred ground. I'm not saying we should do it on the Common, but part of the thinking was that it is one of our most cherished assets, and is there an opportunity to share it?
Thank you for your comments.
Thank you.
Hi, Nico.
Hi, how are you?
I'm doing quite well. My name's Greg Caleri, and I live in Haverhill, but I came over here tonight. I'm not a plant, and as you can probably see, I am very pro Boston 2024. I want to stress a couple things here. Number one, I'm one of the VOLT members, volunteer leadership team members. I can tell you this, one of the things that I've had, the experiences I've had volunteering for different things, has been because you go to youth athletic events, the response is overwhelmingly positive. Enough to put the negatives aside. The professor here has talked about legacy for athletics and the legacy of sport. I saw it last Saturday at Seacoast. There was a Paralympic group right next to us, northeastpassage.org, anypassage.org, and they were all psyched and pumped, and I was so psyched to meet them. So these are something, if you really want to get into this, at least get a good view, volunteer. If you're on the fence, volunteer. The other thing that I wanted to mention, though, the other night I was on a radio show talking about Boston 2024 up in Haverhill on WHAV.net, and one of the things that came up, we had one person called us and said, well, what is the economic impact of this? I don't see it. And tonight I drove through Salem, and I passed by a lot of the tourist attractions that are here. And I passed by a lot of hotels, Middleton and Route 1, coming down 95. Those will all be filled with Olympic visitors should Boston win the bid. And a lot of people don't see that. Huh?
They're already filled every summer.
Okay, but at a yes, I know, but at a premium.
Gentlemen,
yeah.
let's actually.
Yeah, but at a
let's-
premium price. And this
Greg,
will
why
be-
don't you ask your question?
I
please,
don't
if
have
you
a question, it's a
okay.
comment, but I just wanted to say that there will be an economic benefit because this will be tourism and it will be big. So I just want to mention, and they'll be spending a lot more than the average tourist would in the summertime too. So consider the economic effect for your area.
Thanks, Greg. Good to see you. Is there a next question?
Hi.
Hi.
Sorry. My name, am I too close to the mic?
No, you're fine.
Okay. Just wanted to make sure. I'm Ethan Finland. I'm a student at Salem State. I had a couple comments. Well, one comment and a question. First and foremost, I'm very pleased to hear your assurances that Boston 2024 does not seek to use eminent domain. I came into this meeting quite concerned about that. Frankly, I find it would be inappropriate to do so for stadium infrastructure. So I'm very happy to hear that you're committing not to use it for any projects undertaken by the Olympics themselves. My next question concerns transportation to the games or in the area. I was very interested to hear that you have plans for the Wydett Circle area and that you want to make that sort of transit-oriented development type project. My concern is, as someone who is a bit of a transit geek, the only sort of mass transit in that area is a single commuter rail line that doesn't, if I'm correct, doesn't actually come that close. There's a station in that sort of area, and the red line is actually quite far from there. And in addition to that, the area that goes through, as you mentioned, is right along I-93, and as I'm sure anyone who has dealt with the Southeast Expressway can attest, that is already quite problematic as a sort of region of commuting. So my question is, what improvements specifically would you folks advocate for easing commuting to that area in particular, as well as the other venue out towards Alston and all that? Secondly, and I'll be very brief, I know I've gone on a while, with the recent problems of faced, as this winter has made apparent, faced by the transport infrastructure in the Boston region, one, would Boston 2024 be willing to pay a portion of any infrastructure improvements? And secondly, at a time when the existing system is more not falling apart, but in very dire shape, why should the region support an initiative that's going to place even more demand on the system? Thank you so much.
Very good questions, Ethan. I'm going to start and probably ask Kent to help fill in where if I'm missing anything here. But I think, and Kent said it very eloquently earlier, that the Wedette Circle area is, we think, the best location for the stadium because of its access to very important transportation nodes. And that's really how we've been thinking about these proposed venues overall, not just looking at a map of the city and throwing a dart and deciding, hey, that's where we're going to put archery or a stadium. Really, what are already the transportation improvements that have been contemplated that we know are potentially happening in the next few years, and how can we work with again, going back to the existing and future planning for the city and the Commonwealth. So Kent mentioned, the potential planned expansion for South Station is going to be a key component there, and then its connection easily to Broadway and Andrew Station, all on the red line. And just to make a quick note here, that there is no single parking space proposed for spectators for any of the venues. Potentially parking spaces for access, for handicap access, but all spectators we would be proposing public transportation use. The athletes gets transported by bus, or we've had several focus groups with athletes, and they said to us, you know what, we love this idea of a walkable games because it's so much easier for us, and Maureen can probably speak to this better than I can, to just go from the village to the stadium or to our practice venue without having to get on a bus or having to wait through that system. So the way we've been thinking about it is not so much what are the transportation projects needed for the games, but what are the projects that we know are necessary for the continued growth of the city, the Commonwealth, the region, and how can we fit in line with what may already be thought of and planned. Kent, anything else that I missed there? Anything else you wanted to add?
Well, I'll just add quickly, when we talked to VHB, who's our transportation planner, where's the best place to site a stadium? The answer is on top of South Station, which obviously you're not going to do. So Wedette Circle is less than a 5-minute walk down the 4-Point Channel at what we're calling Olympic Boulevard. And the other piece, I mentioned the Boston's announcement of the 2030 plan, the first comprehensive master plan in 50 years. One of the things I'm sure they will be looking at is Dorchester Avenue from Broadway to Andrews and to JFK. That stretch, right where the stadium will be, and I mentioned the 85-acre site, the forecourt, if you will, for the stadium, runs right along Dorchester Avenue. If you've been down it, it's underutilized. There's a lot of industry there. There's the construction crane folks, the glass shops. I'm sure the city will be looking at that hard to make that a true mixed-use urban boulevard. So it's we think it's accessible not only by transit but by pedestrian linkage as well.
Thanks, Ethan. Really good questions.
Thank you so much.
Hello.
Hi, my name is Ben Leibovitz. I'm from Marblehead, right across the water. First of all, I'd like to start just by thanking all of you for coming in tonight and facing our questions and everything. And that I think, basically, I'll put a caveat on some of my questions and comments, and I have a few of them because this is a fraud issue. I would first say, I am a real believer in the power of the Olympics and the symbol of the Olympics in terms of, world peace, understanding, education, the things that you've mentioned. But I go to UMass Boston right now, and so I've been going for a while, and I'm pretty familiar with the area. And so I guess first I'm just curious what you guys see as your vision of partnership with the university and in terms of like you mentioned, legacy, and sort of how you guys can contribute to the expansion of the university that's already going on. And I'm framing this question in the framework of right now the students at UMass are sort of bearing something of the cost of the expansion of the university in terms of we don't end up paying tuition increases by year, but we've seen our fees increase steadily over time, and especially because the nature of the university is we've got all kinds here, and people with need going there. They've been forced to sort of bear a lot of the burden of these costs, and they're seeing how we might be able to bring in outside help to address some of this, make it more accessible year by year. Another concern of mine, just jump around, sorry, is Mr. Curran already mentioned sort of the degradation of the park area and the commons, but I'm also concerned with, recently we've seen, how in other parts of the country, there's been a lot of instances of threats to the coastal environment. I'm interested in how you guys see yourselves being able to protect the some of the very valuable ecosystems that we have here on the coast while your construction and while we hold the Olympics. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ben. Those are really good questions. Kent, do you want to talk about the partnership with the university and opportunities for legacy there?
Yeah, I mentioned the village, as currently planned, is adjacent to UMass Boston on the bay. The main thinking is leaving behind the 4,000 dormitory beds after the Olympics, and potentially dismantling the rest of the housing to be moved into the neighborhoods. One thing I'll mention, it came up on the Common. It's also come up for Franklin Park, where the equestrian events were proposed. Any site that the Olympic touches, whether it's one of those sites or existing college and university facilities, the 2024 would leave the site better than we find it. That's the plan. White Stadium is a good example. If any of you are familiar with that, should equestrian events end up at Franklin Park, the field is used now, but the stadium itself is basically derelict. The plan would be to renovate it for the games, but leave it as a renovated facility for the community after the games.
Okay. And this actually, excuse me if I put another question on you. This sort of goes back to also another question I have about use of the space both during and after the Olympic events. Because there has been concern recently in recent Olympics with some of the use of the space down Dorchester area. It's very mixed neighborhoods, you know, and we want to make sure that we maintain equal access to these spaces, you know. It certainly, you know, seems that it's your intention, but you know, we've seen in practice it can be difficult, especially when we have like President Obama was recently addressing the security aspect, and how we can see this sort of influx of that mentality around the game. People in the neighborhood aren't afforded the same access.
Mm-hmm. Very valid and legitimate point, Ben. I think, and you're absolutely right. I mean, the Harbor Point community is right there, and that's very much front of mind in our thinking about proposed venues and how we mitigate the impact on the most immediate surrounding community folks. There are people that live there. They still need to access their homes. There are still people that need to get to and from work during the time of the game. So as we continue our analysis and think about transportation routing and the security perimeters and how we work through with the immediate neighbors, it's absolutely in front of mind. So thank you very much for your comments, Ben.
Thank you.
Rena Zoostuk, Executive Director of the Salem Chamber of Commerce, and I want to welcome you here to Salem.
Thank you for having us.
Looking forward to a multi-year-long discussion on how to make it the best games ever, because if it becomes a multi-year discussion, you've won the bid. So we like that idea. We're very supportive of the idea, both on the tourism in the tourism sector, as well as in the opportunities that it might bring to the North Shore. Do have some concerns, and I'll get to that in a minute, but I'm wondering whether you are thinking of creating a summary of available facilities and lodging facilities, especially for the teams that come in the 4 years right after Tokyo. Mm-hmm. The travel starts immediately after the games to come here to explore, to play games here, and it's about 26, 28 sports, and who knows how many people, and they all need a facility. And the North Shore is an affordable place for people to come, and not every Olympian will have the money to pay the Boston pricing. So I want to make sure that you have that in your mind.
Absolutely, yes.
Having a little experience with the Olympics in Atlanta, with the Heineken House, being Dutch, we organized the Heineken House with the Dutch-American Chamber. I can tell you it's an enormous amount of fun, other than other things. Anybody, and I agree with you on the legacy aspect, but also the experience of people. If you have been to any Olympic game, you will be a changed person, and you will really, really understand what it is for the athletes in the games. And I appreciate you being here, because it is so unique. There's nothing like it. If you think that the American sports mean something, if you go to the Olympics, this is 10 times, 100 times bigger. And it is the world that is coming to Boston. Mm-hmm. And I would really, really love for this to happen. Couple of things that I think have to do with the North Shore and north of Boston region. If you do discussions in how to get to the games and how to go to the games, one of the major things you can consider for the North Shore is not just the transportation to the venues, but also in Boston. If this prospective bid could do one thing, create a connection between North Station and South Station, that actually works, you would be helping the North Shore, believe it or not, and you would help everybody in Massachusetts. Another thing is that the focus will be tremendously on getting people from the airport to the venues. We want to make sure that you also focus on people from the north side going to the airport and the venues. Don't forget the North Shore. Make sure that the transportation avenues are great. Make sure that the public transportation works. And some people have referred to the happenings this winter. There is so much room for improvement. I think this bid can essentially be the catalyst to make things work. And if we can help you by making it work, just pick up the phone and call us, and we'll show up, because we want to make things work in all levels, and especially in public transportation. Finally, if we can do one thing here in Salem, it's looking at other venues on the North Shore. I have seen it in the newspapers, but as alternative venues. Haven't heard Wonderland be mentioned too often. It's right on a public transportation node, might be available. Mm-hmm. Could be fantastic for a smaller sport to build a new stadium that then later could be used. I know it doesn't fit totally in the compact games, but I'm sure you'll find some hurdles on the way with some of the venues, and I think that would be a fantastic venue that would be able to be used with all the sports people in the North Shore. So if you could do that too, thank you.
Thank you for the suggestions, and we certainly are looking. Yes, I'm sorry, I keep getting in the way of applause. And Kent knows this a lot better than I do, but we're always looking for backups of the backups of the backups, because you're absolutely right. You know, things happen along the way, and potentially we could be talking about 9.5 years from now. So great suggestion there. And you all know your community much better than we do, so help us think through, and I see Lauren here, which is great. Help us think through those nooks and crannies, those places that we might not have immediately thought of. We have very creative and talented people in our master planning team, and some of the ideas that they have, Kent talks about it all the time. It's just, I never would have come up with it, and all of you have these ideas as well. So you're absolutely right. We definitely need some help in thinking through what other potential venues could be. And I mentioned earlier, training facilities and camps for when the athletes and coaches and trainers do arrive pre-games. We will absolutely take you up on your offer as we think through some of our transportation and economic benefit opportunities. And you're absolutely right about the tourism, the unique tourism piece that you have here. Folks will come to the games and they'll stay because there's so much other stuff to do here up on the North Shore and across the Commonwealth too. Unlike some other, previous host cities where really it was just the village, the Olympic Park, and not much else. So we look forward to showcasing everything that Salem and the North Shore has to offer in 2024, and of course leading up to that as well. Thank you. Hello.
Hi, good evening. My name is Laura Swanson. I'm the Interim Executive Director for the North Shore Alliance for Economic Development. And we're absolutely delighted to have Boston 2024 here to give this North Shore community an opportunity to get the information from you exactly what's going on. And then in addition, to provide the community with an opportunity to give you suggestions and some feedback and maybe some solutions that maybe you didn't consider. We would be remiss if we didn't take the opportunity to showcase the region itself. The North Shore is a wonderful place in terms of what you're doing and with the Boston 2024 bid. Sorry. And I was pleased to hear that you were approaching this, that it's not just about Boston, that it's about the state of Massachusetts. So when it was originally coming out, it was Boston and the South Shore and the western part of the state and not the North Shore. So it's really important that you continue to engage the North Shore in what we're doing and what you're doing, because we have tremendous opportunities in terms of venue. We have a great coastline. We have a rich cultural history. We have opportunities in terms of tourism's accommodations. We have an airport. We have hospitals. We have the colleges and universities up here that when you're speaking to the youth of what the Olympic Games are, it's a wonderful opportunity. So we're hoping that you include to continue the North Shore in your dialogue, because we feel that it's something that's extraordinarily important, that we want to make sure that we're able to showcase for you and create an opportunity for the community to hear back from you. So thank you.
Thank you, Laura. I just want to take a quick moment. I want to recognize one of our newest board members, Eric Reddy, just arrived. He's recently joined our board. He is a resident of Lynn, so a neighbor of all of yours. And I will call Eric out because he was actually one of the two people, well, I should just say, it's all his fault, because this was originally his effort in the very beginning. He and another important member of our team, Corey Donopoulos, the two of them really partnered together and over a beer, I believe, came up with this brainstorm idea to think about how we could potentially host the Olympics here in Boston and in Massachusetts. So I just want to thank Eric for being here, for joining our board, and for coming up with this really exciting idea and helping us see it through. Any other questions? Sir, are you asking a question? Come on up.
Hi. My name is David Leibovitz. Yes, he's my son. I want to thank you all for a very professional presentation here tonight. My concerns have more to do with infrastructure and the cost of the infrastructure. I'm old enough to know that, unfortunately, Boston and this area has a sometimes lamentable history when it comes to large projects. So I guess what I'm concerned about here is when we get to the point where the wheels start to get stuck a little bit, what's the division line between the responsibility of the Olympic organizers and the public sector in that regard? How do you view that?
Very good question, David. And I think we would agree with you. There is still a very recent history on some other major public infrastructure projects, but I will say there's also success stories to point to. We also cleaned Boston Harbor very successfully. We've also improved a series of bridges along 93 in the Fast 14 program in the course of 3 months in one summer, 14 bridges, and those are things I think we should highlight and celebrate as well. Certainly recognizing that there have been some challenges along the way. I think in this particular case, it's different because those were certainly government-driven projects. This is an operation that's going to operate like a business. We operate as a business, as a private entity. On the delivery of these infrastructure pieces, we will work with our government partners at the city and state levels. But really, our job is to make sure that we can deliver on infrastructure that's needed. Yes, for the games, but more importantly, and I can't highlight this enough, but needed for the future growth of our region and our state. So completely understand and recognize the concern that you're coming from on this particular question.
Yeah, thank you. Just as a small follow-up to that, would you reiterate what you said earlier this evening about public money?
Sure. So the way that and actually I should have brought up a slide, but the way that the games are funded completely privately. So the operating budgets, everything from feeding the athletes to transporting them to, all the operations of the games is privately raised, coming from various sources such as broadcast revenue, which is the largest source of funding for the Olympic movement. NBC just recently signed a contract with the International Olympic Committee to broadcast the Games through 2032. And we as the host city would receive a very significant amount of that revenue, as well as sponsorships, ticket sales. So those pieces would fund the operating budget of the Games. And to reiterate what I said earlier, no public funds would be used for the construction of venues, so the village, the stadium, any of the temporary facilities that we need, or for the overall operation of the Games.
Do you have any picture at all of what kind of public infrastructure improvements might be necessary?
In our original...
Besides the MBTA.
Really, it is transportation. And in our original bid submission that we offered back in December, we listed about 7, I believe, transportation projects that we thought were key to the success of our ability to deliver on the Games. Many of them have already been in the works, and actually some of them at this point are completed, on the way to being completed. So for example, the restoration or the renovation of the Government Center Blue Line station, the purchasing and construction of new red and orange line cars, which we know is already in the works and very, very much needed. The widening of 128, I believe. So things like that, we had identified as opportunities, that transportation projects that we felt strongly that we needed for the bid to be successful and for the Games to be successful, but again, more importantly, needed very much for the region to be successful.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Other questions? Well, just to go back to a question or a comment that I think somebody made earlier, what do we do with all this information? As Kent mentioned, this is very much an iterative process. We continue to learn from all of you. In the example of Boston Common and other venues, we hear loud and clear that there are some concerns with some ideas that we had, so we will continue to go back and refine our plans. Please stay tuned for more information. Please stay involved with us. Send us your questions and comments. We'd love to hear more from you. We will certainly be back up here on the North Shore with this hospitality and this kind of an invitation. We will absolutely be back. If you are interested in getting more involved with us, there are some blue forms on the table there. Let us know how you'd like to get involved. But we really appreciate your time tonight and all of your creative ideas and suggestions. President Meservey, thank you again for hosting us. Thank you for having us, and we look forward to seeing you all again soon. Thank you so much. Have a good night.